I'm presenting alongside Kathleen and Michelle, who you've already had the pleasure to meet. And we have an absent and poorly colleague, Liv, as well, whose work is represented in the paper. And what we're going to be doing today is we're kind of really sharing the motivations, our intentions, the operations and the outcomes of a certificate course that we co-created primarily between Glasgow, Caledonian, New York's campus and Fashion Revolution USA. Myself, I am based in Glasgow Caledonian University's London campus, and Liv, our other research partner, is based at Fashion Revolution in the UK. So this is a really international and cross-industry academia NGO partnership. So that's kind of just kicking us off to what we're going to be talking about in the session. So we're going to share and flip between slides. So also colleagues do join in if you wish, but I know we've got our kind of designated space to speak. So just so you know what we're talking about today, this is a kind of exploratory case study that we were inspired to kind of pursue after 2 iterations of developing and delivering a new course, a new online certificate course. And what struck us as we went through the process and reflecting back on it was how we had actually developed a community of practice. It wasn't necessarily the intention of doing so, but from what was actually a small in number, a small in hours, certificate course created a kind of huge ripple effect, globally, because we have global participants and within ourselves. And one of the things that I think is important about this piece of work is to state that everyone participating in it sort of considers themselves as an agent of change. So, I mean, you've already heard from Michelle and you've heard a little bit from Kathleen. I think that we all brought that idea to the project, that we wanted things to change, primarily the fashion industry, and we wanted to be able to exert our own influence within the spheres that we operate, but also to empower and give agency to our participants. So although this is a very small study, it's, I don't want to say superficial in a bad way, but it's, it's not a massively in-depth study, but we're really sharing why we did something, how we did it, the reflections of our participants, the feedback we got, and share any learnings that we could have. So although the course was delivered to small cohorts, and you can see the details on the slide there, we feel that there are some learnings from this case that can actually inform how other people go forward and design courses who want to actually shift the needle on sustainable fashion.
We've heard many of these already, so I will jetpack this slide, but we were, to Natasha's point, change. This education offering was meant to drive active change. And so, change, what does change mean? Change in the fashion industry along social and environmental metrics. We know that the business, fashion represents enormous business. It's $3 trillion roughly globally. But, like I said in the last presentation, we're just not moving the needle. This has been acknowledged by the UN, recent IPCC report, and McKinsey. It's really established that we're just not doing enough to make any measurable progress. But what is clear is that data skills are imperative to driving these changes. We do not have shared understandings around things. We do not have measurement on many things that are necessary to change to make a less destructive industry. And we recognize that there's a significant skills gap along data specifically, other things too, and sustainability metrics, and those participants that are operating and seeking to make those changes within the industry.
Everybody, I'm Kathleen Grievers from Fashion Revolution USA, and joining into this paper and the culmination of what we were able to succeed with on these courses is that there is a gap in the education needs. And many often in my role with Fashion Revolution, I've heard so much from the gaps of education and how data is not a part of their experiential learning. So as Fashion Revolution, we strive to have more reportability and more educational resources for the community for development of sustainable practices in fashion, but geared towards more of these research projects. Within our 72 countries around the world, each country has an expertise within the hardships that they've experienced through the fashion industry. And the reporting agents of that, such as the Fashion Transparency Index, which is put out through the global chapter as well as our Fashion Revolution Brazil chapter. And hopefully we'll have more fashion transparency indexes pinpointed to other countries within kind of the larger mapping of fashion sustainability issues. So we empower governments with tools for informed policymaking, meaning that we also deliver opportunities for people to learn on how fashion can change through these government resources. So we try to walk alongside these brands, government expertise, student expertise, faculty. We open source a lot of learning opportunities. We try not to bash brands. We try to educate. So in short, when a student comes to us and says, I want to work for a sustainability company, we say, why? Why don't you want to work with the fast fashion companies and then support their expertise and help to turn the shift of awareness into more sustainability? So thank you for having us, and I'm excited to continue on this presentation.
Yeah, so we've already heard in this session quite a lot about issues in fashion and the links to education. And I think one of the things for fashion being a kind of an applied design is that lots of the education actually came to serve the industry. So whether in the US or in the UK, where historically we have a kind of dominance of fashion education, that emerged as, you know, what skills does the industry need, and often came out of trade colleges rather than being considered as a sort of academic subject as others have been. So I think alongside that, we are seeing in education that there is a sustainability skills gap, and it's been identified, but it's sort of being retrofitted into curricula. And so it doesn't necessarily, exist in an ideal way, and certainly not in the data aspects, which is what we found, because primarily fashion programs have come from a design perspective. They come from a technical perspective. And also, they're fairly homogenous. I mean, when you look around the world, the fashion programs that exist are fairly homogenous. And whether they exist in schools that also teach business subjects, they tend not to have any convergence with more, critical, philosophical subjects, or in fact, the kind of data skills. So there are obviously people need to know about analysis and statistics and those types of things. But we personally, anecdotally, professionally, found an absolute lacking in understanding data. And as I think the other speakers have made really clear, if we don't really understand what we're talking about, and we don't understand what the data is telling us, then it's hard for us as educators and hard for our students and graduates to actually implement the change, even if that's what they want to do, especially with the power of the kind of anti-change lobby. I mean, fashion and textiles is a growing system that wants to maintain some of the inequalities in it, primarily just to fund profit. I mean, some of the fast fashion things, I'm going a bit off topic here, but I don't really consider them fashion. It's just a way of churning money. And that way of churning money is very effective and efficient. And so we really need to be highly educated, not just in the moral aspects about sustainability, but actually how to challenge facts and figures with data. So that was really part of the motivation, especially my colleague Michelle here designed a really great MS in sustainable fashion. So a master's program taught out of the New York campus, but then also in bringing that industry in, which we all do, and so bringing an industry, primarily Fashion Revolution USA, and discussing how can we change this. And I think what's really nice about this certificate offering is one of those conversations on a panel about things need to change actually led to something concrete, because I feel in the sustainable fashion conversation, you can get in a loop we're all talking about things need to change, but actually this is the example we're showing today is an actual real practical result of one of those conversations. And so just a little bit here, because I'm obviously going to read more about this in our paper, but just what are we talking about when we're talking about fashion? And I think it's interesting that already, Michelle, you kind of queued up this conversation about the difference in textiles, apparel and fashion. And so when we are talking about fashion, it is this kind of shared understanding of something that's changing, something that is in fashion, something that is, you know, has fashionability. And so this, as we've already kind of alluded to, is a system that for many of us in the past was more about design and expressing creativity and maybe producing beautiful garments or dressing ourselves in fabulous clothes. But now, I'm sure, as similar to others in this session, conversations that we have around fashion are often about many of the negatives within fashion. And indeed, the understanding of what sustainability means has undergone a bit of a shift, and sort of contemporary understandings, and thanks to Michelle here for the nice quote and definition on the slide from her own writings, we're really understanding that sustainability is multifaceted, and I don't need to explain that to anyone in the session, so I'll hand back to Kathleen.
So about transparency is exactly the key item that Fashion Revolution delivers. We want to increase accountability. We want to publicly disclose, ask for brands to disclose practices and become accountable to consumers and investors and stakeholders. Our goal is to enhance the consumer awareness as well. You know, how much consumers can be informed of their purchase decisions. Transparency promotes benchmarking. It promotes the understanding of performance against their peers. So every company understands what other companies are benchmarking against, hoping to foster more innovation. And it identifies supply chain issues. It identifies the source of hidden issues within labor exploitation, environmental degradation, these human right violations that can be, if transparently spoken about, can be changed. The last piece is also it improves stakeholder engagement. So how do we disclose and facilitate engagement with stakeholders, including NGOs, including labor unions, including communities, and build in more of this collaboration? And those are basically the core of what Fashion Revolution transparency is aiming towards.
The course has, as Natasha mentioned, has been run twice, once in 2022, once in 2023. It consists of 3 synchronous models, and the goal is to provide understanding of the impact of data to sustainability engaged fashion industry participants, for them to empower them to be stewards and advocates for good data practices. We weren't, our aims were measured, I would say, in the outcomes of this course. We weren't going to teach everyone to be statisticians at the end of this, but we found that the awareness was so foundational that we needed to maybe have a course simply on awareness of data practices and testing the waters there. So I'll go over the first 2 modules before Natasha will provide context to the third. Our first one, which was based on the foundations of the fashion data landscape. We did a really clever fact-finding assignment, evaluating a source, teaching people to be skeptical, engage, or what did we call them? Engaged skeptics, I think. They also had to evaluate a sustainability report that maybe it's the State of Fashion 2023, maybe it's the Hey Fashion report, but these reports that are very common in the industry, and evaluate them for their credibility and usefulness. We had guest speakers in that iteration from SAC, and Arbor.ai, which is a data management tech platform. And in 2, which was taught by our colleague Liv, who is not here, she had wonderful projects built into her data literacy for decision-making module, which had an applied policy briefing project where students had to evaluate the data usage within policy briefings. She had wonderful guest speakers from Changing Markets Foundation, WikiRate, and Open Supply Hub. And really it was focused on navigating the sustainable fashion landscape, having learned those best practices. How do we now engage? What do you, in the course of your job, need to know to be a good steward? I'll pass it to Natasha.
Yeah, and just really briefly, this culminated in the third module, which was a space for students to reflect on what they'd learned, to state where they would like to take their learnings and apply this to an area of the industry. So an area, say something like denim production or a specific brand, do some analysis, create data visualizations and understand how you communicate. And working with Fashion Revolution was so great on this, because Fashion Revolution, I'm sure you'll agree, are fantastic at their communications. And so we actually also analysed how to communicate data in an effective and impactful way in the third kind of assessed module. And I'll hand over to Kathleen.
Our findings of this course allowed for not only the sharing of the reporting that Fashion Revolution has done, but it also showed us where the student engagement is and where we can also add in more education pieces. So I think the overview of this was highly impactful for both how Fashion Revolution moves forward as a nonprofit based on their students' report, being involved in the class, being able to add in more concepts of research, and also show that this exactly what these outcomes were. The gaps of education are very apparent, and we need these types of certificate courses, graduate courses, undergraduate courses to be more involved within nonprofit of especially fashion, but all areas where schools can sometimes not support this specific type of outcomes, where they need the nonprofit reporting to be able to factually identify these issues such as data reporting.
And I think I just add really quickly here, mindful of time and happy to pick up in any Q&A. But I think one of the most important takeaways for all of us, which loops back to how I was introducing, is actually by creating a community of practice, by linking younger people in the industry with more established industry players, with NGOs, with academics, and actually people understanding that they could have an active role and have agency and create change within areas that they had influence on. And so that's the type of thing that we picked up in the feedback from interviewing students and the course evaluations, which are included in the written paper. Thank you.